Good evening, I'm Jose Cardenas. Learn about a new center named after an Arizona congressman encouraging political engagement and public service for young students. And we'll look at the latest treatments and research for people with Down syndrome. All this coming up next on Horizonte.
Funding for Horizonte is made possible by contributions by the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station.
Thank you for joining us. Last year, Arizona Congressman Ed Pastor, the first Hispanic from Arizona elected to Congress and the senior member of Arizona's congressional delegation, retired after 23 years in Washington. He continues to be a role model for students pursuing careers in public service. Now, the ASU College of Public Programs will be the new home to the Congressman Ed Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service. Joining me now to talk more about the new center is Congressman Ed Pastor. Also here is Jonathan Coppell, Dean of ASU's College of Public Service and Community Solutions. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Jose.
Congressman, you've always seemed to enjoy your job. And I don't mean to suggest that you weren't happy doing it, but you do seem to be pretty relaxed now. So can you give us just a quick report before we get to the meat of the interview on life after Washington?
It's great. I don't have to get on a plane. I don't have to watch the Weather Channel. I don't have to worry about the weather in D.C. or other cities. And so it's great. January 6th, it was 8 below in D.C. and it was 78 here. So it's great.
Is there anything you miss?
Not really. I mean, probably I enjoy what I'm doing, and I really don't miss anything. I mean, the flights were something I was doing, and I don't have to do that anymore. Haven't been to the airport in 6 months. So that tells you what how I'm doing.
You don't miss that life, but
No.
yet you're now involved in an effort to encourage young people to get involved in politics.
Yes, I am.
Tell us about that. Why?
Well, I believe that it's important while students are at the university to be able to engage in the policy making, be able to see what policymakers are doing, policies that will affect their career and their lives, and also to engage in the political process, because this democracy needs to have people engaged. And so I thought that working with Dean Coppell and the School of Public Service, that we could start a center that would help the students learn how to engage and have them participate in policymaking and politics.
And Dean, before we get into the meat of what the center will actually do, how did this come about from ASU's perspective?
So this is something that we've wanted to do for some time. You have to have complementary to the classroom learning opportunities for students to engage in the real rumble of politics. And what does it mean? What does it mean to run a campaign? What does it mean to bring people together from different opinions and different backgrounds and forge a solution? And the only way you can really understand that is to get the students involved and to sit down with people like Congressman Pastor and members of the legislature or the city council and say, what are you actually doing? How do you get things done? How do you make your neighborhood safer? How do you get people jobs? How do you make programs work more efficiently? What we didn't have was the right inspirational character, in some sense, to build our center around. And so when Congressman Pastor announced his retirement, it just seemed like a natural to have a figure who has represented everything that public service should be in our state. It's not about partisanship. It's not about beating the hell out of the other guy and putting up negative ads. It's about finding solutions to our problems. That was the right person to inspire young Arizonans to get involved in politics and say, oh, this is a way I can make a difference.
Well, the congressman certainly has a wonderful reputation in Arizona and in Washington, well-liked, admired, and respected by people from both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely.
And yet generally politicians have such a poor image. They rank pretty low. So how do you get students interested in politics when politics, so many of the young people seem to say, I don't want anything to do with it?
So I think part of the problem is when we talk about politics, we talk about all of the most unsavory elements. When we talk about campaigns and elections, we treat it as it's a horse race. Right? Who's ahead today? Who raised more money? Who's up? Who's down? We pay relatively little attention to actually the substance of what these people do once they're in office. Even when we get in the substance, it's who's voting on this and who's voting on that. I would argue that many of the ways in which Congressman Pastor has made a huge difference in the lives of Arizonans has nothing to do with the vote that he cast on this, that, or the other thing. It's about how he connected important constituents with the services that they need. It's about how he brought together different interests in Arizona and got them working together instead of against one another. That's things that people in politics do. That's a way of working to create change through political and governmental structures that most people never hear about. So part of the way to overcome the cynicism and the negativism is to get the students exposed to exactly what people do in political office that does make a difference. If you asked young people today, they would say, oh, I want to make a difference, but politics, that's not about that. I'm going to work for a nonprofit, or I'm going to work. There's nothing wrong with that. But they don't even understand how a congressman makes a difference in the world. Right? They need to talk to Congressman Pastor, among others, and understand what he's done and how he used his office effectively. If they don't have that direct engagement and they rely just, no offense, if they rely just on television, they'll never understand it. That's why you've got to create this direct connection, and that's what the center's about.
So our show is an exception to your last
Of course,
comment, I know.
of course.
But Congressman, so you have this conversation that the dean's talking about.
Right.
What are you telling these kids?
Well, it's not going to be me only. I think it's going to be a spectrum of people. It's opportunities for them to have internships. It's going to be an opportunity for them to hear speakers from different levels of government and policymakers. It'll be attend seminars, so it'll be a resource so that students can participate and be able to find out what is happening around them as they learn about a career, what's happening around them, what the policymakers are doing and changing laws or making policy that's going to affect their career, especially in an area that they are studying for. And so I want them, the students, to be able to get as many resources, different people, seminars, internships, different experiences, so when they graduate, they have a better understanding of what policies have affected their careers, what policies are going to affect their careers, and they have a better understanding. And hopefully also that they may decide to get involved in the political process because they want to make a difference.
We talked off camera, and you gave a real close-to-home example of how students might be able to influence policy, or at least get involved on something that affects people here in Arizona.
Sure. Recently, the director of Morrison Institute talked about TANF and how the legislature now has cut TANF for 1 year. After 1 year,
aid to needy families.
Yeah, aid to needy families. The program was entitled, was a 5-year program. Now it's cut to 1 year. Well, you have students that are in the School of Social Work. Obviously, they're going to be working with people who are in need of these programs. Well, I think it'd be very interesting for the students to be able to hear from the policymakers, people at the state legislature, to tell them and inform them of why this policy came about. What were the reasons? And also, the students may be able to hear from people that are going to be affected, people who work in the field, social workers that work in the field, so that they know what this change, what this policy, what effect it's going to have. And so it allows the student today to say, hey, they've changed a policy that I'm going to be involved in this kind of work, and this is going to be the cause and effect of what has happened.
So Dean, this center will be one of a number of centers at very prestigious schools, and there's some collaboration that goes on. Explain that.
So I think we've got a lot of centers that are about doing research and working with organizations in the community to directly engage in the derivation of solutions to a whole bunch of things. And of course, you know this broad spectrum, everything from dealing with issues of community safety, and our criminology faculty are working with police departments around the valley, for example, figuring out how to use body cameras to affect police behavior. This is going to be something that's complementary to those centers, because what this addresses is how you get the engagement at the political level of these policies, of these policy debates. So let me give a good example. we recently launched in the college, actually as part of the Morrison Institute, the Kyle Center on Water Policy. Well, I've had Jon Kyl in my class talking with students about how he, as a senator and and as a member of the House, and in other capacities in public service, played a role in shaping the water policy of the state of Arizona. And the students got to hear from him the difference that one individual made in shaping that policy. Now that's critical in terms of the shape of our state today. Why do we have water and California's running out? Because of the political process that he and many other elected officials engaged in and used politics to reach a compromise. And you know, and the congressman knows, a complicated thing. You've got mining interests, you've got agricultural interests, you've got tribal interests. It all had to be negotiated. And the students have to understand what it means to be in politics and how politics is part of the policy-making process. If we treated it only as an academic subject, sometimes that would get lost and it would seem like it was an academic exercise. Politics is part of policy-making, and that has to be brought in as well. And so this center is very complementary to our more academic centers, even those that are very engaged in finding real solutions, because this introduces that political dimension and shows that it's not a dirty word. It's part of how we've gotten things done in this country for over 200 years.
And there are also other centers like it at other universities, is my understanding, that you'll be having some collaborations with?
Absolutely. That's one of the aspects of this that's most exciting. So the Pasteur Center is now joining a network that's been organized by Harvard's Institute of Politics of similar centers at universities around the country. And so at the University of Kansas, there's a Bob Dole Center for Public Service. There's an Eagleton Center at Rutgers, and so on and so forth. And all of them have a sort of similar mission to inspire young people into service. And so one of the benefits of ASU being part of this network is that ASU students, and this has already been happening, will interact with other public service-minded students from around the country. It's worth noting that, I think this is a great and exciting aspect of the center, that the Pasteur Center is the first of these centers that's not named after a white male politician, right? So I actually think it's an interesting coming of age of Latino participation in politics that the Pasteur Center now joins this other sort of pantheon of influential political leaders in America.
And I think it's also worth noting, as you commented to me before we came on the set, you yourself participated in something like this when you were in college.
I was active at the Institute of Politics, and I experienced firsthand this sort of engagement with senators and governors and actually international leaders, and it was incredibly influential to me, and I saw how many of my classmates followed that path. And it's eye-opening because you say, wait a second, it's actually an interesting thing, because many people say, well, you get to interact with all these great leaders and these men and women who are shaping the universe and all this sort of stuff. And that's nice, but actually one of the most important things is that you sit down and you're having dinner with a congressman or a senator or a president of France or whatever, and you realize, oh, it's just a guy. I could do that, right? This guy was just a kid growing up in Miami, and now he's this important member of Congress, and he did all this stuff. If he could do that, why couldn't I do that? And the answer is, there's no reason you couldn't do that. That's the point. It's not to sort of create distance. It's to show this is a way you can make a difference. Any kid in Arizona, if they want to make a difference in their community, they could follow in the congressman's footsteps. It's hard work. It's not easy, but they could do it. And that's part of the point.
Congressman, the last word for you, and if you don't mind, quickly your thoughts on this Congress, the first one you've not participated in for some time. They seem, with the Republicans in control of both houses, to actually be getting some things done. Some of them in furtherance of programs that the president is in support of. Your assessment?
Well, it's interesting because when it first started, I thought John Boehner was going to have some problems with more conservatives. But in some issues, he's reached out to the Democrats back when they had to deal with the Homeland Security, the funding of Homeland Security. Basically, they reached out to the Democrats and got it funded. And so it's interesting that there's some bipartisanship that's worked. The trade promotion that the president wanted, TAA was a bipartisan bill. And as I understand, they're going through the appropriation process, both the House and the Senate. And so it's interesting that where John Boehner has needed, he's reached out to the Democrats and been able to pass some legislation.
So maybe some lessons for you all to talk about as Senator gets underway?
Well, the answer is yes, because politics is about people. And so if you get people engaged and you get people communicating, then you'll have political action and you'll have solutions to problems that we face as a country.
Which is what the Center is all about. Dean Capel, Congressman Pastor,
Thank you,
thanks
Jose.
for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
To find out more information about what's on Horizonte, go to azpbs.org and click on the Horizonte tab at the top of the screen. There you can access many features to become a more informed Horizonte viewer. Watch interviews by clicking on the video button or by scrolling down to the bottom of the page for the most recent segments. Learn about more specific topics like arts and culture and immigration. You can also find out what's on Horizonte for the upcoming week. If you would like an RSS feed, a podcast, or you want to buy a video, that's all on our website too. Other features include our collection of website links and a special page for educators. While you're there, show your support for Horizonte with just one click. Discover all that's on Horizonte. Visit azpbs.org, Horizonte today.
When you want to be more connected, friend us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch us online.
Down syndrome is the most frequently occurring chromosomal disorder and the leading cause of intellectual and developmental delay in the U.S. and in the world. Population of people in the U.S. with Down syndrome is unknown. Here to talk more about this is Dr. Michael Harpold, Chief Scientific Officer for the LuMind Foundation. Dr. Harpold, thanks for joining us on Horizonte. Tell us quickly about the foundation itself.
Well, the foundation was formed in 2004, so we're a relatively new foundation. And it was formed by a set of parents of children with Down syndrome who were actually looking at all the research that was happening on a variety of disorders and wondered why there wasn't more research actually happening with respect to Down syndrome, and specifically with respect to the intellectual disability with Down syndrome. So they got together, formed a foundation, and the idea behind it was to basically stimulate biomedical research that would accelerate the development of new therapies for the improvement of cognition associated with the developmental intellectual disability. That includes learning, memory, speech. But in addition, another aspect is to prevent or halt the earlier onset of Alzheimer's disease.
And that's one of the interesting developments that you and I were talking a little earlier off set. The connection between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's.
Right, right. Well, it's actually been known for some time, although I think it's a little recognized and particularly widely by the public. But as it turns out, Down syndrome is the result of 3 chromosomes, and specifically 3 chromosome 21. And on chromosome 21, and this was, there was some mapping that was done before the Human Genome Project, but certainly the Human Genome Project actually defined and allowed you to really see the gene itself. There's a specific gene that's on chromosome 21 that it gives rise to the major constituent of the amyloid plaques that one sees in Alzheimer's disease. So individuals with Down syndrome are producing more of that particular gene product and thereby developing these amyloid plaques, which is essentially the defining characteristic or one of the defining characteristics of Alzheimer's disease.
And so what you have now, as I understand it, you have children with Down syndrome are living longer.
That's right.
At the same time, though, they do develop Alzheimer's symptoms at an earlier age. So you've got a population group that you can study, and that may lead to some discoveries both with respect to Down syndrome and Alzheimer's.
That's absolutely right. The connection actually is that as recently as the mid-1980s, the life expectancy for individuals, the median life expectancy for individuals was less than 30. It's actually between 25 and 30. That's now improved, where the median life expectancy is approximately 60 years old. So with individuals living longer, you're actually seeing now more of that Alzheimer's disease in individuals with Down syndrome. There's another interesting connection here, I think. You've probably read about a lot of spectacular failures of new potential Alzheimer's therapeutics out there. And part of the problem that I think the researchers have now come to a conclusion about is that you're actually starting these clinical trials with individuals that are already advanced, too advanced with the Alzheimer's disease to actually see an impact. So most researchers actually believe many of these new potential drugs actually may have some impact on halting or preventing Alzheimer's disease. The problem is we don't really know who develops Alzheimer's disease. So I think Down syndrome and individuals with Down syndrome really provide a unique key to address this we know every individual with Down syndrome is going to develop the same neuropathology that one sees in Alzheimer's disease by their 40s. The majority then go on and develop the dementia associated with Alzheimer's disease. So now we actually have a population of individuals we know are going to develop that pathology, and with clinical trials we could actually prove whether or not these potential new drugs would actually have an impact.
So let's talk about some developments in therapies for individuals who have Down syndrome.
Right. Well, as recently as 2004, when our foundation was founded, there really wasn't any a sufficient knowledge to be able to develop therapies. In other words, we really didn't understand what were the biological mechanisms that were involved in the cognitive impairment that you see with the developmental intellectual disability. And without knowing anything about those mechanisms, you couldn't define a drug target, you couldn't develop drugs. So what we set off to do is to put a lot of effort into just fundamental biology. We've actually discovered multiple mechanisms that are involved in or associated with that intellectual disability in Down syndrome, the cognitive impairment. And in addition, defined some drug targets, some potential drugs. And actually, since 2004, we've done that. And in 2011, an initial clinical trial actually started on a drug working on a mechanism that was really only discovered since 2004.
And what have been the results? What are you seeing in these
trials?
Well,
it's in the process. This is actually Roche Pharmaceutical Company, so a major multinational pharmaceutical company with interest in Down syndrome, completely new drug. They were actually developing for another purpose, realized in our discussions with them that it worked on one of the mechanisms that have been identified in the research. They changed course, did due diligence. They actually initiated a clinical trial, a phase 1 clinical trial in 2011. That's now progressed. The phase 1 clinical trial is about safety and tolerability. So that's the phase 1. The phase 2 is an advanced stage of a clinical trial where one actually tries to determine, does the drug actually have work? Does it have an impact? So they're now currently in a phase 2 that began just about a year ago.
But things look promising?
Well, certainly it's safe. It's encouraging based on anecdotal evidence, but until they actually go through the clinical trial, break what they call the blind. So this is a double blinded, placebo-controlled trial. Absolute gold standard, the highest quality clinical trial that can be run. So until you're at the end, you won't really know the results.
So we may be seeing something in the not too distant future.
That's right.
Let me ask you this.
I think
we've got a
within the
little
next year.
over a minute left. In terms of impacts on Hispanics and other minority groups, the incidence is not higher amongst them than it is for the Anglo population. But life expectancy is shorter. Why is that?
Well, I think most people believe that that's probably could be traced to healthcare disparity, which is not just with respect to Down syndrome, but certainly more broadly. And they may not have access to the more advanced medical care. One of the things is 50 to 60% of individuals with Down syndrome actually have heart valve defects that can be corrected with surgery. That's been a big boom in terms of extending that life expectancy. But that may not be applicable, as you well know, widely to every part of the population.
Because people can't afford the insurance and other things
exactly.
like that.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 10 years with the changes that are going to be occurring in healthcare.
Well, it's a fascinating topic. It's encouraging to see the efforts that are being made, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show to talk about good developments.
Well, thank you for having me and putting a spotlight on a really important but under-recognized topic.
Well, thank you for joining us on Horizonte.
Thank you.
And that is our show for tonight from all of us here at Horizonte and 8. Thank you for watching. I'm Jose Cardenas. Have a good evening.
Funding for Horizonte is made possible by contributions by the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station.